Hello and welcome to today's YouTube video. Today we're going over how to play middle games. I feel like this is a very important part of chess because it's like what most people are playing their games in. A lot of games don't get to the end game, and a lot of games get past the opening. But not a lot of videos are out there on how to play middle games because it is very complicated and it's very hard to prepare for. My first recommendation would actually just be do puzzles because you do have to know how to calculate in order to play middle games effectively. But I'm also going to be explaining concepts here, like the main things you have to do. And the first thing you have to do is identify your strengths and identify your weaknesses. Next thing you have to do is identify your opponent's weaknesses. And then the third thing you have to do is don't make more weaknesses. So notice how the main thing I'm talking about here is weaknesses. So you have to identify what to do based on that. So you have to make a plan. So I'm just going to go through an opening real quick, an opening that I know pretty well. So I know some of the middle game ideas. This is very common. This is the most common line in this. So I'm just going to go through it pretty quickly. Here, blah, 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 castles, here, h3. Then, let's see, bishop goes out here, castle, and then, let's see, anything here, rook c8, then you play c3. Okay, I'm going to call this middle game now, since this is basically most that I know. So, in this position, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Funnily enough, there's not actually that many weaknesses for white here. A good plan here is maybe to play b5 and b4, although you can't really do that right now. So a lot of players actually go for a6, b5 in this position, now that I remember correctly. But after a6, usually white goes for a4 to stop that plan entirely. And in terms of weaknesses for black, there are actually quite a few. Notice how your bishop is staring at the d6 pawn, and that's basically a permanent weakness. So you can just continually build up pressure with queen b3 and queen to a3 maybe. That's a good idea because that pressures everything. And another weakness for black here is the d5 pawn and the b7 pawn. So guess what a very common move here is? For example, after h6, queen b3 is kind of just hitting everything in the position, is preparing queen to a3, attacking another weakness for black. And a big mistake here would actually be to play c4. Although it is kind of a logical move, it's a pretty logical pawn break in my opinion. But it goes against the nature of the position, and let me tell you why. I've played this kind of idea in this kind of structure in an over-the-board game, and it's just a complete wrong idea. It makes sense though. You kind of want to open up the position because you have the bishop pair and black does not, which is another strength of the white position. But the reason it's not a good plan is because after c4, pawn takes, let's say bishop takes, although I'd probably do knight takes. Black can essentially replace that pawn with d5, and guess what? He got rid of the weakness on d6, and also his pawn on d5 is not as weak without the d6 pawn behind it, because that allows the queen to defend it, and you can just put more pieces behind it as black. So c4 is the wrong idea. So what is the right idea? Again, you want to go for ideas like a4, prophylaxis, stopping a6 and b5 ideas for black, and kind of just run black out of moves here, and just make positionally good moves. See my last video to improve your ideas among that. But good positional ideas here is, again, piece placement. So what do you want for piece placement here? You want your rook on c1 maybe to stop any ideas with c file opening, because guess what, your c pawn's opening. Black can't really have any pawn breaks in the center, so maybe don't even move your rook to the c file because it's never really going to open because you don't want to go for c4. So maybe a4, and you can play a5 and bring your rook out this way. You can bring your bishop out to b5, get a pin on the rook here. You can maybe play rook e1 and try and shift your knight over to g3. I'm kind of coming up with these moves on the fly, but you get the idea. My knight is my worst piece right now, so the way I came up with that maneuver is I'm just like, okay, if I move my rook to e1, I can use the f1 square for my knight, and guess what? It is a decent square on g3, although it does block the bishop, so maybe going to b1 and a3 would be a smarter idea, so you can place it on b5, attacking these pawns along with the help of the bishop. That also seems like a strong idea. So that's a pretty good place to start in terms of getting familiar of what you need to do during the middle game. Attack weaknesses, identify weaknesses, and often that'll lead you to a good plan where to place your pieces, and what to attack and what not to do. Because the main thing of the position here for white, main advantage, is long-term pressure on the d6 pawn, and just you don't really have any weaknesses here as white. Your position is very solid, and also you have the bishop pair, which is objectively and positionally a good thing to have in any position. Well, not any position, but in most positions in the middle game. But on to the next example, which I'm going to go to as black, since I like to go over examples in the Karo Khan, since that's what I recommend to beginners. So e4, c6, and let's go most commonly played in my experience, the advanced variation, and I recommend c5, immediately challenging the center. So it's just what I recommend. And most common move I see is knight f3, and personally I like knight to c6, although taking on d4 is objectively the best move because you remove a central pawn from the white position. The reason I like this though is because you can most oftentimes exploit the pin on the knight on f3. So I think this actually makes for an easier game plan. But let's go over this just a little bit deeper. I don't really know any theory here, so I'm just playing on principle and just instinct, I guess. So let's say bishop d3. A lot of people, no, actually, let's not do that. Let's play bishop e2, although maybe, okay, I'm gonna do that again. Bishop to b5. This is a pretty common move. People like to pin this knight, although often it's not actually such a good move. And essentially you're just going to play e6. And you don't really care about giving away this knight for the doubled pawns, because first of all, this pawn doesn't really matter, because you can always just take and undouble your pawns, and if they take, then you get to develop your bishop, and it's just, you don't really have to worry about doubling pawns here, so don't worry about that at all. Queen a5 check doesn't do anything, since black can just play knight to c3, defending the bishop. But yeah, main ideas here is identifying the weaknesses. Guess what? The weakness on d4 is often going to lead you to good places. So even right now, taking is a pretty good idea, except that puts more pressure on your pinned knight. So that's why you should play something like, let's say, I don't know, castles. Taking on d4, completely fine, because takes, you can support your knight with so many pieces here that you don't have to worry about much. And now identify the next weakness here, now that you've removed a central pawn, which is just a fundamentally good move. What's the next weakness? e5. It has nothing protecting it right now, and you can pretty heavily attack it pretty quickly. If you want to remove the pin, that's fine. For example, rook to e1, which is a good move. You can play a6. a6 is just a good move here. Kind of gets rid of all the pressure. I don't know. If they move back, then whatever. Doesn't really matter. But let's say they take. You can just do I like taking on the pawn because that's another pawn towards the center. So taking towards the center rather than away from the center. Knight's already in the center, so. But I like taking the pawn because guess what? You can just play c5 immediately after and open up lines for your bishop, another square for your knight, and guess what? You can attack this weakness even more. So let's say they develop their knight. You have c5 immediately, and you're just immediately much better. Knight f3, and you go knight to c6. Yeah, the game plan here for white is so much more difficult than black, because the top moves here, guess what? They're knight a4, which makes absolute zero sense to me. I don't even know what it does because this pawn's protected, and you can easily protect it different ways. So knight a4 makes no sense, super hard to find. I don't know what it does. Second move, knight e2. What does that even do? I don't know. It blocks your rook. That's not a very good move, in my opinion. And third move, let's see, h4. Again, I don't even know what that does. So, in my opinion, the game plan is much easier for black here. Let's try and make a logical move for white. Let's make loop for the king. Maybe that's what h4 does. But I don't know why would you push it 2 squares rather than 1. It seems more weak there. You can immediately attack it with bishop 2e7. Kind of get a tempo though. Then black has to play g3, but they don't have a late squared bishop, so it doesn't seem like a very good plan for white. But yeah, after h3, you can just play bishop e7. Again, this is what you want to play anyways. And again, all the moves for white are so cryptic here that it's just objectively hard to play for white, which is why I like this knight c6 rather than taking the center first. It just creates better practical chances. Yeah, anyways, after you've kind of resolved your problems in the opening with like the pin and all that, you took it to the center and played c5. You just want to get developed and castle. This is kind of still opening, you're not castled yet. So let's try and make another logical move here with white. No, that blunders a piece. Let's see. Because of this, you just have pawn fork. So again, it's very hard to play for white here. Maybe you play bishop here. This seems like a square that's legal to go to, I guess. It doesn't really do anything, but at least it's developing a piece. And now you castle. Okay, what do you do now? Let's say this is where you're at of the opening, even though it's move 13. Most people probably don't know what they're doing a lot earlier, but it's okay. I'm just going to call this the middle game now. What are you trying to do here? Well, pause video and try and find out. Identify the weaknesses, identify your weaknesses. Okay, so main weakness I see here for white is the b2 pawn and also the e5 pawn. Both these don't really have other pawns supporting them, although the pawn on e5 has a lot of pieces supporting it, so it's going to be quite hard to attack. The main weaknesses for black here, a6, and I guess c5 is maybe weakness, although you can just push it immediately if you need to. The knight on c6 is a little bit tender, but you can protect it with queen c7. Queen c7 isn't scary, by the way, because the bishop doesn't look at it, and this pawn is never really going to move anywhere, unless you force it to with like f6, but don't do that while your queen's on c7, although the pawn is technically pinned to the bishop there. But yeah, weaknesses for black actually are on the king side, oftentimes, because white likes to play, for example, let's say queen to e3. Not there. Queen to e3 is a pretty common idea, and people just really like thirsting for stuff like knight g5, and they really like just trying to attack with like rook lifts here, but oftentimes they're just unsound and they don't work at all. So yeah, you don't really have to worry about weaknesses over here. Just don't let your opponent get all their pieces over and don't do anything about it. That's the main thing you shouldn't do. So yeah, even right here, you can just play rook b8, and you're just attacking weaknesses. It's objectively a good move. Don't thirst for moves like knight b4 because it doesn't really do anything, and it kind of gets in the way of actually attacking weaknesses. So don't do that. Good idea though, maybe it would be knight a5 and put it on c4 instead to again attack the weakness in the white position. Notice how they can play b3 though, so it does actually get a little bit rough. But yeah, here you can just develop your other pieces. Yeah, here, now guess what? There's a new weakness on c2, and now you can go knight b4 to put more pressure on it. You can play d4 now, and try and open up your bishop on b7 here. And guess what? There's another weakness now on f3 if black doesn't look at that piece with its queen. So yeah, all these little things keep in mind. If one plan doesn't work, try and move on to the next one. Just make sure you have a plan. As long as you have a plan, you're probably doing much better than your opponent because most people don't actually know what they're doing. Like it's kind of funny to say that, but most people don't know what they're doing. They make like 1 to 2 move plans, and then they're like, "Oh, that didn't work. Let's blunder a piece." But yeah, that does it for today's YouTube video. Don't forget to leave a comment down below, like and subscribe. And as always, I will see you in tomorrow's video.